Hello, and welcome back to Venus Rising. I'm your host, Callie Fell, and today we welcome Libby Emmons, Editor-in-Chief for the Post Millennial, to the show. Libby holds a Master's of Fine Arts from Columbia University and a Bachelor of Arts from Sarah Lawrence College. You can find Libby's work published in many different outlets, including Quillette, Spectator, New York Post, The Federalist, and that's just to name a few. So Libby, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Before we really start chatting about you and your work, I want to take a moment and thank you for writing a review on our newest film, newest documentary film called Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender, and publishing a piece I co-wrote concerning Vermont's proposal on the right to personal reproductive autonomy. So just want to say thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for doing that work. It's really important work. I was glad to cover it.
Yeah, so that kind of leads us into what got you started in journalism. Did you grow up wanting to be a writer and an editor, or have you always been an editor? Kind of give us a little background about you.
No, I always wanted to be an artist, and I was a theater artist for many years. My master's is in playwriting. I produced independent theater in Philadelphia and then in New York City for maybe 20 years or so.
Wow.
I never wanted to be a journalist. I never wanted to do anything like that. I was always strictly into aesthetics and making artwork and making beautiful things. And that was my primary motivation in making art. In a lot of respects, I really just wanted to create experiences and be part of experiences with audiences. Communicate in a sort of collective way and experience things together. So that's what I wanted to do. That is what I did for a long time. I'm very grateful that I had the opportunities that I did. I wasn't able to continue it after I wrote for Quillette I wrote about transhumanism, but there were issues of transgender ideology that were brought up in that article as well. I was writing about undercurrents of transhumanism. That was in the summer of 2018. And it was after my feminist theater collective kicked me out and gave back our grant. And the independent theater community decided that I was a hateful, horrible person, that I left the arts. And
after writing this article in Quillette.
Yeah. And then I started doing journalism full time. I had been writing previously because I had found actually that there were issues I couldn't bring up in the arts, or that it just wasn't effective. The first piece that I wrote for the Federalist was actually about a curator and poet, a stateless man called Ashraf Fayyad. He is Palestinian. And he was arrested and imprisoned in Saudi Arabia, and I believe he's still imprisoned. And his crime was apostasy, which is basically heresy against Islam. But I had seen his work at the Venice Biennale in 2013. I was totally blown away by it. It was funny. It was evocative. It was beautiful. And then when I learned that he had been arrested and imprisoned, I was just so horrified that this amazing artistic voice, speaking truth, speaking honestly, communicating with audiences in such an effective way. I'm Catholic. I know very little about Islam. And here was these universal experiences that he had curated and brought together. Absolutely amazing. So that was my first real foray into journalism on my own. And then I continued writing. I found it to be an effective way to get ideas across and to engage in a bigger conversation.
Yeah. And it seems like, when I think of art and theater and print art and all of those, it seems like that's the place that you should be able to freely express ideas, opinions, whether or not it's going against what culture might be going through or presenting at the time. So it seems like art should be one of those very safe spaces for expression.
As should any kind of academic pursuit, right? I mean, when the schools that I went to, the education that I had definitely changed. I was always in pretty elite schools. I went to public school, but then for high school, I went to like a very, beautiful private school Again, I'm very grateful that I was able to go there. But the whole thing was about like critical thinking. It was like, here's an idea. Let's talk about it from every conceivable perspective, whether we think that that's the right perspective or the moral perspective or the ethical perspective. Let's throw everything we can come up with at this idea and see what holds, right? I mean, it's sort of the Hegelian dialectic of conversation, where you have an idea, you counter it with another idea, and then you come up with, a synthesis of those ideas. And maybe that's where we could go with it. That had substantially changed. We don't find that kind of intellectual pursuit, ideas for ideas' sake, aesthetics for aesthetics' sake. We don't find that as much. Everything is so loaded, with like hurt and grievance and anger. No one can just be like, here's something crazy. Let's try out this crazy idea,
Yeah.
And it's almost as though individuals just aren't grounded in anything. So we have to like grab at all of these threads and hope that perhaps if we knit them together, we become real people.
So it seems like, although you were enjoying the arts and theater, there was something deeper kind of pulling you to, I have a voice, I need to write about these issues that I'm seeing, that I'm bothered with. And that kind of pulled you in that realm. Is that right? Or
yeah, it definitely did. It definitely did. And I had been pursuing journalism more and more in the last few years that I was involved in the arts. Because when you write about ideas in art, it's the character is saying something or the story is sort of giving an idea, but that's not what art is about. Art isn't about saying, this is what I think. What do you guys think about this? Art is about exploring the internal life of a character. It's about exploring story arc. And I often, as a playwright, what I really wanted to do was tell stories that were evocative of I always had this picture in my head of the stories told about the hunt around a fire, the end of the day, and there's nothing else. There's the story. What is the legend? Let's tell the legend of our day. And so that's what I was really interested in. Like, what are these stories that ground us, that bring us together, that tie us to each other, that make our community? And that's not really the kind of culture we're in now. The arts got very involved in telling you what to think, as opposed to sharing an experience and saying, here's a bunch of crazy ideas. What do you feel about them? What do you think about them? And the arts got very dogmatic. There started to be, when I was in grad school, this idea that if you were an artist, you needed to be an activist. And I hated that so much because activism leads to propaganda, right? It's like you say something because it backs your cause. You don't say something because it's honest. And to a certain extent, there's a difference between honesty and truth. We could argue all day about the existence of, objective truth and objective reality, but honesty comes from the heart. And it's telling your experience, and it's telling, what you feel about things. And that has substantially disappeared from what is driving, I think, the arts in the US. Are there brilliant artists out there still doing that? Yes. They're banging their heads against a brick wall. You can see like the blood just dripping down. And there's brilliant artists out there, and they're subjected to this garbage. They have to wade through this propagandist sewage to try and get anything across. And you kind of have to play ball, or else there's no point in even.
Right. You still have to also make a living at the end of the day too, right? Like you have to think about how you're going to support yourself. And the big difference, I think, too, between like art and journalism or playwriting and art and that, right, is that you get a lot more, you can tell a story, you can be more creative in art, whereas journalism is more, I'm going to tell you what I see as I see it. And you don't want to give any type of suggestion, right? Like true journalism, right, is just reporting the facts and having people make a conclusion themselves, right? Or Like, do you have an issue like with the,
I think that's reporting, I think that would be reporting.
Sure.
I do think that there is, and we have some great reporters on our team at Post Millennial. Andy No is a reporter. He's an editor at large, but he's also, he's this amazing crime reporter. And he really digs into stuff. Mia Cuthell is also a terrific reporter with us. And they just report it. They're like, This is the thing that happened and here's how it went down. I've done that. I've learned how to do that. But what I much prefer is to analyze what's going on and say, here's an analysis of this, or here's my view of that. I think that all of these things are journalism, but you do have to make a clear differentiation and change hats when you're saying, right now, I'm going to write something as objectively as possible. And right now I'm going to write something that is my perspective and my analysis based on other information of what happened.
Okay.
So yeah, I think both of those are journalism, but.
Gotcha. So moving forward then, what motivates your writings now and what are you most passionate about writing about? You have so many articles all through the web and I love several of them. But what's your topic that you find most intriguing to write about?
I'm really a free speech person. So what I really like to write about is how important it is to speak your mind and to give others the space to speak their minds as well. There should be no censorship. There should be no canceling. You can criticize someone for what they think, but you can't take their job away for what they think. Sure. There's a huge difference between those two things. So that's something that I really like to write about because I want people to understand that the old liberal idea of saying something like, I hate your views, but I respect your right to have them and I will fight for your right to express them. That is the epitome of liberalism. We have totally lost that on the left. We've lost that in progressivism. The liberal idea of standing up for someone's free speech, no matter what it is that they say, has all but disappeared from, or maybe entirely disappeared, I think, from the left political perspective in this country. And that's a shame. That's just such a shame. The way I landed in conservatism was that the conservative side of things was like, hey, we might not agree with you, but we respect your right to say whatever it is that you think. And I was like, yes, that's almost the entire point of this country. You can practice the religion that you want. You can still have your job. You can still get married. You can still send your kids to school. You can still drink the water fountain. You can, none of these things have a bearing on your right to civil liberties and independence in the public sector, and nor should they, right? So that's super important to me. I also write a lot about issues that I think are affecting women, specifically, and I was raised by basically two feminists. My mom was a feminist, so was my stepmom, and they had drastically different views on what that meant. I didn't live with my mom. I didn't really grow up with her. She was a corporate attorney. She pursued her career. I was always very proud of her. She worked her ass off,
Yeah.
She was really successful. She was, she's still around. She's retired. My stepmom was a homemaker. She really wanted to have kids. She wanted to raise a family. She wanted to keep the house. On the first day of school, she would make me a cake every year. She'd be like, hey, it's the first day of school. Her view was that women should have the right to stay home and raise their families if they thought that was important. That was her view as a feminist. She was not super well educated. She wasn't, she was smart, certainly. This was what was important to her. My mom, her career was important to her.
Yeah.
Both of these views should be part of the feminist movement.
Sure.
And so when I see, we hate this woman, we're feminists, and we hate this woman because she disagrees with us. Well, she is achieving on her own terms and with her own view. Feminism shouldn't have to mean that you all agree. It means that women have these rights. Women have equality under the law. That's, for me, what feminism is, what it's all about. And so now when we see women essentially being erased from the concept of womanhood itself, I think that that's just so damaging, and it's so
Mhm.
damaging to women. It's damaging to our rights. You also had the whole Me Too movement, which I think infantilized women to such a large degree. There's like this law in California now where you have to get consent within the bedroom or else you can be accused of rape. And it's like, just like the sodomy laws in Georgia that said homosexual sex was illegal. And the answer was, get out of my bedroom, you government.
Right.
That should still be the case. Women are not these, vulnerable, insipid, emotionally deranged people who need the government's protection all the time.
Right.
And we used to know this as feminists. And
Mhm.
now we have young women who perhaps they're lesbians, which, great. Perhaps they don't want to be homemakers. Perhaps they don't want to be corporate lawyers. Perhaps they want to be construction workers, or literally anything else that they can come up with. And they are being told that that's not feminine,
Mhm.
that means they're not women. How insane is that? And
Right.
so I write about I write about that.
I
That
like
was,
it. I like both of
yeah.
those. They're great. And it's interesting to kind of segue how amidst all of that and feminism and protecting women, we also really want to protect our spaces, right? Like getting back to kind
Mhm.
of the transhumanism and what that's doing to women's spaces. And I think Jennifer was telling me that Jennifer, our founder and president,
Mhm.
she first found out about your work when she was attending a panel in New York. I believe it was in New York City. And you were there with Megan Murphy, who is a woman who has been canceled, who's in our latest film. And then Kelly J was there, and I think
Mhm.
Natasha Chart. And this was, you guys were even
And I
having
think Linda Bellos was also there.
Yes. And I think so. You guys were even having a hard time like finding a space to hold this panel because of protesters. And it was an event to kind of talk about women's spaces, right? And it was kind of
We got kicked
on.
out of the New York Public Library.
Yes. Yeah. So tell us more about this event and how this feeds into what we were just
Um,
talking about a little bit.
this was a very cool event. We were kicked out of the New York Public Library. I had a hard time showing up at this event and not like just fangirling at everybody, because I was like, oh my God, it's Megan Murphy. You're so amazing. I find you so interesting. Natasha, I had known only from social media, and she's so outspoken and
Yeah.
fierce,
She's
and
amazing. I
she's
love
still a
Natasha.
mom, and she's just like, what? And she's a painter. She's like, I'm doing this. And Kelly J, like when she started putting up those billboards, I may have wept. I don't know. So, I was just like totally awed by these women. And we were able to do this panel. It was interesting. My brother came with his fiance, and they were like, I don't know about this. And I was like, guys, like maybe just think it through. And they, we were able to have a dialogue about it, which was interesting, because for a lot of people, they just hear the thing that they're told and they figure it must be true. Trans women are women, right?
Mhm.
And so you just say that that's true. And I think that it's now certainly there have been throughout history people who have chosen to live at the opposite sex. There have been women jazz singers who performed as men. There's been this throughout history, but the sort of indoctrination of it now as a movement,
Mhm.
I think not only undermines women, but undermines those people who were living as the opposite sex per their own choosing, without having to make a giant social movement out of it and take away women's change rooms. Or the International Olympic Commission just the other day said that now biological males who identify as transgender and use female pronouns don't even have to suppress their testosterone levels
Right.
in order to compete against women. And even after testosterone treatment, women can't even get up to half the average amount of testosterone that is in the lowest amount of testosterone, rich blood for men. Why do we not want women to be able to compete? in elite sports internationally. Women fought so hard for that.
Right.
And then we just gave it away. Why?
Yeah.
Why did we just give it away? And when you see somebody like Laurel Hubbard, for example, who's the New Zealand weightlifter, who definitely took spots away from indigenous, like Maori lifters, competing. Now, Hubbard failed,
Right.
did not medal, didn't place at all, did an incredibly poor job up there playing a woman at the for the weightlifting. But what was Hubbard doing there?
Right.
And then Hubbard went on to win Sportswoman of the Year from a university in New Zealand. The Sportsman of the Year award was also given to somebody who was not female. Why are we doing this?
Right. We're completely erasing everything I feel like that we've accomplished, and we've, you know, and it's funny, this year, wasn't it the 100th year of the women's right to vote this year? And I thought that was so interesting how it completely, like, I didn't see it anywhere in media at all. And I was like, we should be celebrating that this year. And it's like, we've completely, even in that regard, it wasn't even, it's like, okay.
Well, you know, the suffragettes were, of course, the suffragettes have been slammed at this point for having left out everybody else, or having, you know, some of them had spoken against the rights of Black people to vote before women were given the right to vote. So, of course, we're not even allowed to respect their achievements or their work at this point.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they're like the white feminists who we're supposed to hate now, even though we can vote because of them.
Right.
You know?
Right. So why do you think it's become so controversial that women want their own spaces, their own rights, their own protections? In California, we're dealing with this in prisons, women's prisons.
That's insane.
You know? So.
And how they brought the condoms in now.
Yeah.
And there's not supposed to be sex in prison, but like women are getting condoms now so that when they get raped in their jail cells, they don't have to bear children that then are supposed to get raised in prison. Like what the hell is this? And if these people are trans, but they're not taking any, you know, they're not taking estrogen, and so they're still fully, they're not chemically castrated as you might be after lots of estrogen, then how were we possibly identifying them as female if they have erect penises that they can use to forcibly penetrate a woman who is locked up with them? Like, what madness.
We're passing out condoms to do this.
We're facilitating this.
Right.
I don't think that this is a reaction against women's spaces. I don't think that this is even, it almost feels like it has nothing to do with women at all. Instead, it seems like this is a men's movement, a men's grievance movement. So, you know, you have so many, we've had a culture going on for a while where white men are the devil. I'm not pro anyone being identified as evil based on their characteristics, immutable, unchangeable characteristics, being male, being female, being white, being Black, whatever it is. I fully believe in total equality before the law, of course. I'm an American. That's like the foundation of our entire country, whether you like it or not. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it is. Jefferson perhaps couldn't wrap his life around that, but he certainly could wrap his mind around it. So it's almost as though it's a grievance movement designed to attain the desired victimhood status, so that you don't have to take a step back in society, but you can try and gain control in this new way. The reaction against women, you know, could this just be like a new misogyny where, you know, in order to fully, if I may use this word in this context, in order to fully colonize women's bodies with the trans activist movement, which of course is different than trans persons, who, if you're a grown-up, you ought to live as you please. You ought to, you know, of course you have the right to pursue your own happiness, all of that. Right. But the movement itself is, I think, what is so damaging to women. And I don't think it's all people who are, you know, identified as trans either who are doing this. I think that's, it's obviously true that it's not that. But yeah, it's almost like this grievance misogyny that has reared up as a means to take power. I mean, perhaps
Mhm.
I could
Yeah, no,
totally
that's
be wrong on
interesting.
that, but
That's interesting. I want to go back to a little bit what we touched on a little bit earlier about being canceled and in art and academia. Um, and it does really seem like people only want to see or hear one side of an issue these days. And I'm remembering the 60 Minutes episode where they had the detrans voices on, and
yes,
people were outraged. Like
they freaked out.
they did. And we've had Scott Nugent on our show here, and he's a trans man who is against the medical transitioning of children, as an adult, do as you please, right? Pursuit of happiness. But he was canceled recently on Twitter and received a lot of hate. And Megan Murphy, we've talked about, was canceled. Colin Wright. What do you think this cancel culture is about? And do you think that there's hope in journalism when people are getting canceled at the rate that they are?
I don't know. I think the thing with cancel culture, you have progressives who go about this canceling saying that it's really just consequences. And I don't think it is really just consequences. Um, I think it's about not being able to have an intellectual discourse or debate. It's about not being fully grounded in who you are or what you believe is right or a value system or any moral foundation. So you just have to lash out at anything that may undermine what it is that what it is that you think you are standing for. You can't hear it. There was when I had a theater company, our motto was that we were creating art for non-fascist living, meaning that we would seek at every turn to understand the foundations of our beliefs, to understand why we believed what we believed, so that we could rule our ideas instead of be ruled by them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in large part, our culture now is being ruled by its ideas. There is no debate. There is no intellectual inquiry. No one knows where to stand. It's as though the ground is just in this state of permanent shifting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the progressive ideology isn't actually based in anything. It's just a constant shifting of sands. And it's very hard to know what you're standing for, what you believe in. There was John McWhorter came out with this book recently, Woke Racism, and he walked through all of the incredible contradictions that the progressive movement will give you, such as if you're a white person, you have to have respect for Black culture, but you can't be part of Black culture, or that's cultural appropriation. All of these different things that are like that, where you're hearing two messages at once. You're supposed to parse them and figure out what to do. It's impossible to figure out what to do because they're contradictory messages. So people, lash out and they embark on this cancel culture, which is certainly not something new in the course of human events. I was recently in Salem, Massachusetts, with my son. My family's from New England. My grandmother passed, and so, we went up there and we checked out he'd wanted to see the Salem Witch Museum for a long time.
Yeah.
This is what happened in Salem. There were some lies told by some young people. The lies were believed, and 19 people were murdered by the state because of these lies. We're not having quite so many murders at the hands of the state. There certainly are murders at the hands of the state, but I'm like, whatever, that's a thing. But we're seeing this again, a belief system that is so fragile that it cannot take any contradiction is not a belief system worth upholding.
Yeah. Interesting. We find that our work at the Center for Bioethics and Culture, we focus a lot on surrogacy and now the trans debate as it pertains to children. And we feel like we can't get a proper hearing in media. And it's really hard to get journalists to report on risks to women who are surrogates, who are egg donors. But they're really happy to report, the Kardashians and Anderson Cooper, and they're so happy, or they're seemingly happy stories that really erase the women who are doing the work, bringing these little ones into the world. Do you see that, or why do you think that it's so hard why are we so attracted to the happy story of these like celebrities, and we're completely kind of erasing women in that space as well?
So the Kardashians, Kim Kardashian, she had a surrogate baby. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, nobody really reported on that. And I'll tell you something, one reason that was so is it was very hard to get information. So you would see like maybe it was sort of reported vaguely that Kim Kardashian had a surrogate. I didn't know that for sure until right now.
Oh yeah.
I didn't look all the way into it. It's not, it doesn't come out because the people who are engaging in this kind of womb and human rental don't want it to come out. I was appalled at that recently with the transportation secretary, Biden's transportation secretary Pete Buttigieg, right? So he and his husband had, they ended up with some children somehow. It was not clear how they ended up with these children, if these children were adopted. I think adoption is a great thing. There's adoption in my family, and I'm grateful to the women that had these children and let our family raise them, for however that turned out. The thing with Buttigieg, though, is here he is on parental leave as the country goes to hell. But here he is on parental leave for children, these photographs, these family photographs. And there's one very notable person missing, which is the woman who actually bore these children. Were the children adopted? I don't know. I was talking to Jennifer about it, and she was saying, she thought that it was surrogacy. It probably was. It would be very hard to get that information. Medical records are, of course, sealed.
Oh, sure.
You're like, bound to secrecy if you sell your body for, baby rental or whatever it is. It's I follow your newsletter, and it's shocking what these stories are. I don't think people want to hear these stories because they have within them, these stories contain within them a very deep conflict.
Yeah.
And that conflict is it the right of everyone to have a child if they so choose? There's a question. If it is the right of everyone to have a child if they so choose, are there means that should be off limits to how to obtain those children? And the answer to that is, of course, that there are. You should not be permitted to buy children. You should not be permitted to steal children. We know that for sure. These are crimes. Human trafficking is a crime. Kidnapping is a crime. So what is surrogacy? Where does surrogacy land? Is surrogacy something where the woman has consented? And in that case, it's very similar to sex work, right? It's the purchase of reproductive organs for a temporary use, right? I mean, the difference is that with surrogacy, you're getting screwed for 9 months instead of, just the afternoon or what have you. So that's a big difference.
And it reduces, I think, too, my feminist side talking, like it reduces, I think, women to their parts, right? Like you're forgetting that in pregnancy, it's more than just the uterus that's changing and is
your
affected.
Whole self.
Right. Same with sex too. I think, there's no way to completely separate that from your body experience and emotional and spiritual, all that.
Well, and this comes back to the whole concept of transhumanism, which basically attempts to answer the Cartesian question and say, the mind and body are in fact, right? Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. Are the mind and body really separate, or are they inexorably linked? And in fact, one doesn't exist without the other. What is a mind without a body? Is that feasible? We like to think in our science fiction that it is, but what is a body without a mind? That's something that probably should be terminated from life support. What is it that we're doing? And it's very interesting too, that you have the surrogacy issues coming to the fore at the same time as transgender ideology would have us say that women are not even their parts. Right? Women are not even their bodies. Anybody can be a woman. It doesn't matter what body they have. Well, everyone knows what a woman is. when it's time to fight for abortion rights or figure out who the hell is supposed to, birth the baby. Everyone knows then, and there's literally no question.
Right.
And the White House was questioned about this. You had the press secretary, who I disagree with on everything pretty much, but she's a very accomplished and powerful woman. And it is cool to see a woman in that position, but I disagree with her about everything. She was out there talking about, women's right to choose after talking about basically how women are not even their bodies,
Right.
and being very pro the erasure of the concept of mother in the Biden budget. What the hell?
You can't have both.
How do people keep both of these things in their mind and believe the truth of both of them? There is literally nothing. There is no philosophical concept that can link these two things as both true.
Right.
It just doesn't exist. And they tell us that. They don't even tell us that it does exist. They just tell us we have to believe both things.
Both of them at the same time.
Both of them at the same time. And they don't make any sense. And so when here we are, you and I, Jennifer, others who are, embarking on trying to make these things clear, and we say, hey, you can't actually believe both these things at once and have a value system or a system of beliefs or any understanding as to how to make decisions, right? You don't know what you're talking about. Then is the lash out, right? Then is the canceling. You're not allowed to discuss how, the emperor has no clothes. Just feel the silk. It's light as air. It makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
And it's hard to hold on to your sense. It would be easier to not hold on to your sense. It would be easier to just give it up and watch your Netflix, take your Xanax, eat your takeaway food. It would be so much easier to just go along with that.
Go about your day today.
Yeah. And, I guess there's a lot of people who do find that an easier road. I don't know how I could possibly do that. I don't actually think it's possible for me to do that. And I remember the thing with my theater company, and when that all went down and I was writing the article for Quillette about transhumanism, and I'd been working on it for a while. I had been researching these ideas without realizing I was going to write an article for over a year. I had been doing this research. I was just so fascinated and drawn in. And then I was like, I really ought to write about this now that I've come up with an idea. I should write it down. And I remember sitting down to write it and even feeling a little faint and even having like my eyes sort of go a little black. And I was like, am I really going to write this? This could be extremely damaging to me personally and professionally. Maybe I shouldn't write it, was a thought that I had. But I don't know why. My mother says I'm oppositional. I'm not really capable of just not doing it, Once I have the idea, I'm sort of just like, here we go. I guess we're doing this. Good luck to you, kid. That's sort of what happens.
Yeah. Well, we need people like that, right? We need voices. We need people who are compelled to share their story, their experience, their research. We need that. That's,
And it's scary, but children need to be taught that they need to stand up for themselves and their friends.
Yeah.
When I've got a son here. He's not here right now, but I have this son, and I'm always teaching him, when you grow up, you're going to grow up into a strong man who can take care of himself, who can take care of the people he loves, who can speak his mind with confidence and poise. That's what we're doing.
Right.
So when I yell at you to practice your piano, this is actually the thing. This is what we're doing. This
right.
is,
Right.
I think that that's so important. And it's the hard, I think it's the harder choice in our culture right now. I think it used to be the obvious choice.
Yeah.
And I think now it's substantially more difficult.
Yeah, I agree. On Twitter, speaking of your little boy, you are active around education. Do you have any thoughts on the things that public schools are teaching our kids that undermine this biological reality? And are you concerned about the stories in the news where the rights of parents are being diminished or disregarded in the public school setting?
I'm concerned about all those things. Yeah. As a parent and as a person who just would like to have a functioning society that we all get to have, I'm concerned about these things. I was horrified, like so many parents were, that the Biden administration decided the FBI should investigate concerned parents at school board meetings, especially after it turned out that one of those parents was violent and angry. I don't know how violent he was, but he was like very vocally upset at a school board meeting, and it turned out that his daughter had been raped in a bathroom.
Wow.
Right? This was the Loudoun County, Virginia story. The Daily Wire uncovered that. What it took was for a journalist to go ask him what happened.
Yeah.
No one else did that. No one else just asked what happened.
Yeah. But we assumed he was this,
we assumed that he was this insane trans hater.
Yeah.
That was that incident, and that man was arrested. That happened at the same school board meeting in June where a coach was being pilloried for refusing to use preferred pronouns.
I remember that story too.
Yeah, and that was the same school district. That was the same school board meeting. Virginia has a policy of letting anybody use whichever bathrooms they choose for whatever reason they want, even apparently if it's to, rape somebody. Then it turned out that those two individuals had a prior relationship of some sort. But I don't think that diminishes the violent assault in the bathroom. Certainly, male partners assault their female sex partners like literally all the time. And that's not reported. We had, I think I saw something recently. It was like there were 45 trans persons who were killed in the US during the last year, which is a tragedy. It wasn't mentioned that most of these were also involving sex work or criminal activity. When was the last time you heard how many women were killed by their spouses, domestic partners, or sexual partners or boyfriends?
Right.
I don't think we have that number. Women go missing on Native American reservations all throughout the West. That's happening in Canada and Mexico. Nobody cares what happens to these women. But yeah, in terms of public school, I'm concerned about it. I saw some evidence of, critical race theory in my son's education. I think it's disingenuous when the progressive left tells us that critical race theory isn't being taught in schools, because of course it isn't. Critical race theory is in the graduate schools. It's in the Masters of Education programs. And then this is what our burgeoning teachers learn. And then they use it as the backbone of the curriculum because that's in the elementary schools, because that's what they were taught. So are kids learning critical race theory? No, they are learning lessons that are based in the ideas of critical race theory. That's what they're learning. We were learning that in prep school in the early 90s. It was all there. It was there then. It's there now. It hasn't gone anywhere. The idea that the country is entirely racist from its core is already in the educational system. It's already there. It's been there for, a long time. It was intentionally put there by people who wanted this to be taught. There are lesson plans for how to teach graduate students to implement critical race theory in their own pedagogy and teaching. It's there already. So I do have concerns about that. I think to a large degree, it would be very hard for lots of parents to do homeschooling.
Yeah.
There's a whole push, do homeschooling. I don't think that's a practical answer for lots and lots and lots of people.
Right.
For reasons including teaching is really hard. Right. It's hard to get kids to sit down. It's hard to figure out what to teach them. It's hard to keep that up. Then you have to do socialization. You have to figure it all out. I think that's complicated.
Yeah.
For lots of people, including myself. But I do think that you can send your kid to school. You just have to be aware of what's going on. You have to look through their notes. You have to talk to their teachers. What are you guys studying next?
Right.
Can you tell me about it? You have to talk to your kids about it takes extra work, and you have to know. These are things I talk to my kid about all the time. He comes home from school and I say, let's look in that binder. What do you got today? What are you guys studying? What's coming up next? And we look at it and we discuss it. I don't want him to hate himself. I don't want him to hate anybody else.
Right.
The kids throw around the term racist at school. Everyone gets targeted with this. It doesn't matter if your only friends are people of color, or if you're one of the only white kids in your whole grade. None of that matters. It's just sort of how it goes down. The gender stuff, I am concerned about that. And I'm concerned about the push for really explicit sex ed as well. I think these are things where parents need to take charge. There is also an issue, though. I mean, there is a conflict, right? Not all parents are super engaged with their kids.
Right.
You have parents who suck. You have parents who are working like 5 jobs,
right.
So they don't suck, but like that's tough.
Right.
You have single parents for whatever reason. It's really hard, right? It's really hard. And so to a large degree, I think you have government agencies saying, well, we have to step in. Where are their hearts? Their hearts are in the right place. We have to step in. We have to help these parents. We have to provide more education. We have to provide more funding. We have to provide more food. And I understand where they're coming from in wanting to do that. It's a place of compassion. But I also think that it would certainly behoove conservatives and community organizations to step up, right? To say, hey, we're the Catholic Church. This is our church, or we're the Lutheran church, or we're the mosque. Like, pick your church. I don't care. We have after school programs available. There are books here. There are people to play with the kids. Nothing weird is going to happen. Send them over. And we'll also give some moral foundation.
Sure.
That would be helpful. It's not the government's job. And as soon as the government does step in and starts doing all of these things, the taxpayers are going to want some accountability. And the next thing you know, you have taxpayers demanding accountability from the government for what's happening inside families. And then we have a massive overreach. Yeah. This happened. I was talking to an American writer. She ran a story with us a while ago, but she was living in Norway. And she said that's what's going on there. They have so many programs for families that now you have the government being asked to be accountable for what's going on in families, and taxpayers are calling the shots.
They're hanging out in the living room. They've gone from the bedroom to the living room to the dining room table.
Right. They're doing all of these things. You can't eat that. You can't study this.
Right.
You have to believe that. But there have been a lot of cases where it's like the school will socially gender transition a child without the parent's knowledge. I think that should basically be criminal. That should not be allowed.
That happened to some of the mothers in the film that you reviewed for us, Transmission, What's Rushed for Assigned Gender. Several of the moms had that going on in their schools.
I've often thought if I were the parent in that case, if that were me and I had the capability, there would be no more internet anywhere in the house, and we would go live in the woods. And now it's time to learn how to do survival. And once you have to chop your own wood, and I don't know, like skin your own bunnies. Sounds ghastly to me. But like, who has time to sit there and mess around with what gender they truly are when you have to figure out how to eat?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. That's my fantasy answer for how I would handle something like that. I don't know if I would, I don't know how things would go, but
right. It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. And that's again where church, other groups, private organizations need to stand up and be a support for families who are going through that, or parents, and provide that. I think we've stepped away from that. I agree.
Yeah, I remember this one case. This was like a year ago. It was the pandemic, homelessness, and a friend of mine in California was complaining that a rich man had stepped in to build a bunch of affordable housing. And she was like, why is this man having to do this? The government should be doing this. And I said, no, this man feels a calling to build affordable housing, and therefore he should do it. That's that's clearly his job now. He came up with the idea and he obviously should do it. That's why he's there.
Right.
My son will say to me sometimes, Mom, why didn't anybody think of this? And he'll tell me some idea. And I'll say, somebody did. It was you. You just thought of it.
Right.
And he's like, oh, it's my idea. I'm like, yeah, it's your idea. There's a reason we all exist.
Right.
You know, we all get to come up with our own crazy ideas and try and implement them for the, for our own betterment and for our families and for our communities. Why shouldn't we build affordable housing if we are able to do it? Why should we tell the government that they should do it?
Right.
Why shouldn't we defend our own homes? Like, why shouldn't we have our own fire extinguishers just in case? Shouldn't we be responsible for ourselves and our families to a large degree and not depend on other people to not only take care of those things for us, but do them the way that we think they should be done? And who are we to impose our values on everybody else? You know what I mean? Through the government's tool. If you want to impose your values on other people, invite them to your home and then talk to them. Don't get the government to do it for you or whatever.
Be a responsible adult.
Be a responsible person. Talk to your friends. Don't indoctrinate them and then tell them you're not going to be friends with them if they disagree with you.
So true. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your ideas and your opinions and sitting down with me like a normal adult. But unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, and it's been a privilege to have you. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Listeners, you can follow Libby on Twitter with the handle Libby Emmons, LibbyEmmons. And I also am really excited to make you all aware of an upcoming event that we will be hosting in New York City on March 16th of next year, of 2022. And we're going to have a panel discussion where Libby will be present. We'll be joining Jennifer Law, our founder and president. She'll be joining Natasha Chart, Kelly J. Keane from the UK, Helena, a detransitioned young woman. And this would be a side event around the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And our focus for the talk will be on challenges facing women today to provide true equality and empowerment for women and children. So you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter or on our webpage and stay up to date. And so you can get information on where that event will be held and what time, but save the date if you'd like to meet us and meet Libby on March 16th. Our goal is to create conversation, which we did today, facilitate discussion, and encourage you all to think beyond the masses. Thank you all for listening.